Chapter 3. The following day, Jacob grinned at the remembrance of his brief conversation with Penelope and her son in his office. He'd never met a teen who liked to get up early, and Evan proved no exception. He admired the boy's commitment when agreeing to volunteer at the clinic. Of course, the real test was yet to come. Would Evan show up at the assigned hour? Jacob scanned his mile-long to-do list for the evening. More house hunting with Candy Winchester can wait, he concluded as he closed his office. He looked up Penelope's address, discovered she lived on the edge of town, and decided to drive to her home. He'd purchased a 10-year-old yellow 4-door Volkswagen when he'd moved to Rose's. Driving wasn't his thing, and he'd never gotten used to seeing cars on the wrong side of the road in America. He'd relied on big city transportation in Atlanta, and Rose's didn't boast subways. Fortunately, traffic here was minimal. He didn't make house calls, and strep throat wasn't usually a cause for concern. However, Evan was a new patient and, for lack of any other reason, rational or otherwise, why not? He was attracted to Penelope and wanted to get to know her better. Reservations stirred. He'd vowed to keep his life simple ever since his niece's death. He'd vowed to prioritize what was important. He'd vowed to devote his career to serving people. 18-hour workdays had worked well throughout his successful career. He had shouldered all responsibility with unrestrained energy, though he had never achieved his goal. Success and kudos aren't necessary anymore, he reminded himself. He'd quit his job, walked away to reassess and refocus, searching for more simplistic goals. His thoughts gravitated to Penelope. From what he'd learned from their plane conversation, she was anything but simple. However, she was unassuming and vivacious. In fact, she was a stunner. Penelope revealed that Evan's father didn't see his son much anymore. Although he didn't intend to become a surrogate father, Jacob made a mental note to engage with Evan, and volunteering at the clinic proved a positive beginning. He located Penelope's home and parked at the curb, viewing the expansive driveway and surrounding half-acre of land. Inhaling, he breathed in freshly mowed grass and the honeyed scent of late-blooming flowers. Their home was a beaut, a splendid old-fashioned Victorian, classic, with a rectangular-shaped sloping roof and boasting a veranda. He got out of his car and scanned the property. This was the home he envisioned for himself. This was exactly the type of house he was looking for. The few Candy had shown him were out of his price range. He'd poured a lot of money into helping his sister, Kylie, rebuild her life after his niece's death, and even more money setting up his clinic. He paused to study Penelope's home. He wasn't certain what to expect when he stepped inside, but based on the exterior, he assumed the interior was gorgeous. All the homes he'd viewed in Rose's had lacked one specific requirement. He wanted to have a medical practice in his home, and most weren't big enough. This home, painted in colors of vivid blue with gold trim, resembled a dollhouse. Standing 2 stories with a stained glass window facing the street and a rounded turret, the architecture was a reminder of the historic Victorian era, where nothing came cheap. He surveyed the area. The house was located at the end of a main road leading to town. Penelope hadn't exaggerated when she described Rose's. Storybook wasn't an adequate description. The town was a scene straight out of a Norman Rockwell painting. In addition, from his early morning jogs, he discovered something even better than a wholesome culture. He'd observed the heart, the people. Young and old alike were kind, interested in others, and respectful. honest and polite, and middle America at its best, where church was at the center. He scanned the block. Other homes and businesses were located nearby Penelope's house. Surely the area was zoned for both business and residential properties. Not only would a home office reduce his overhead, but he could treat more patients on evenings and weekends. He liked the idea of a short commute from his kitchen to his office instead of driving to town. Trouble was, this house was hers, not his. You'll never be able to afford anything on this scale. Occasionally, his mother's voice echoed in his ears, and his chest tightened. He allowed the mental numbness to take hold and shook away his contemplation. He could afford a lovely home, eventually. He stepped onto the porch. After seeing patients at his office all day, he'd stopped at his rental apartment at the Roses Hotel to shower and change into dark jeans and a clean t-shirt. He rang the doorbell. From inside, a squeal sounded. "Giblet, get into your cage this instant!" The sound of rushing footsteps. "There, I've got you. Come with me. It's probably the postman with a late toy delivery." Penelope opened the front door with a tiny hamster nestled in her hands. She gaped. "Jacob?" "Hello, Penelope." He caught his breath. He'd forgotten what she'd been wearing on the plane or in his office, but it wasn't a stunning striped dress that flared at the waist. That generous figure, her bare toes peeked out from a pair of beige sandals. He'd be thinking about her for the rest of the evening. Oddly, her sharp blue eyes, focused on him, were even more captivating. Her gaze narrowed. "Why are you here?" "I'm not delivering any toys." "I can see that. Is Evan supposed to report to your clinic tonight?" "I hope not, unless he intended to expose my patients to strep throat." "Then why?" A slight breeze lifted her dark hair, shaped in a short bob style. Classy and elegant silver highlights framed her round face. He wanted to tuck one of the stray strands behind her ears. He cleared his throat. "You drink coffee, right?" "Every day." He held out a bag of freshly ground coffee he'd picked up at the local shop in town. "Did you reach your quota for today?" "That will never happen." "Care to brew us a cup?" Fearing she might protest, he held up a hand to hold her off. "You like coffee too?" she asked. "Very much." He had her complete attention. "You didn't mention anything about coffee on the plane." "No?" Her delicate eyebrows came together. "All you said was that you like to drink." "I do, especially ginger beer." She tilted her head. "What is ginger beer?" "A beverage made from ginger, sugar, and water." "Is the beer alcoholic?" "Sometimes. Where I come from, ginger beer is a local favorite." "Australia?" "Yeah, down under." "I suspected you were from Australia, but couldn't place your accent for certain." She peered out the door. "You drove here?" "I didn't ride my kangaroo. In fact, riding a kangaroo is forbidden in Australia. Probably in America, too." "Why did you suspect I was Australian?" She offered a half smile. "Your phrases, your accent a little. It's mostly Americanized now." "You've lived in America a long time?" He stroked his fingers over the hamster's caramel-colored fur. "Uh-huh." A man's foreign accent is usually appealing to a woman. She stared at him while holding the wriggling hamster. "Usually?" She didn't reply and pushed the door wide open with her hip. "Would you like to come in?" "I was hoping you'd ask." "I don't have any ginger beer." He shook the bag. "I'll provide the coffee." She ushered him inside and cradled the hamster. "Are you afraid of hamsters?" "Is it going to race about?" "Not if I can help it, and I've been informed that Giblet is a she." Evan refilled her water bowl a while ago and didn't secure the cage. Penelope placed the hamster in a cage situated on a table in the hallway and secured the latch. Are you comfortable with animals? Animals are my passion. Jacob closed the door behind him. The gorgeous Penelope was becoming his passion too. My family owned a dog, a golden retriever. In Australia? We moved to the States when I entered primary school and gave the dog to a friend. My mom and dad announced that our dog was too old for a big trip and a bigger change. Didn't your parents like Australia? Australia is awesome, from what I remembered, and they both grew up near Melbourne, where I was raised. Unfortunately, my father went bankrupt. I'm sorry, she said quietly. He shifted. All righty then. If he was trying to make a good impression, blurting out his family's descent into poverty wasn't the best way to go about it. We struggled, but we landed on our feet, he replied. What happened? The bankruptcy? Long story. My father picked up my mom, my sister Kylie, and me, and then found a job in Maryland. We've lived in the States ever since. Do you see your parents often? My mom on occasion. My sister lives near her, but is considering moving back to Australia. Do you visit your mother? Not as often as I should. Is your sister older or younger? Kylie is younger than me. She and her husband split soon after... He swallowed the lump in his throat. The expected tears came to his eyes. Penelope studied him, giving him no place to look, but straight at her. She didn't press him for any more details, and he didn't offer an explanation. I'm sorry, she said simply. Thanks. He couldn't say more. After a difficult and uncomfortable minute with no words, he relaxed. That was extraordinary. He never relaxed when he spoke about his adorable niece, Linda, and her tragic death. Normally, he tensed and felt worse. If you ever need to talk with someone, Penelope offered a tentative smile. I'm a good listener. I don't usually babble on and on, honest. She attempted to lighten the mood with a disparaging wave at herself. She'd noted his sadness and responded with empathy. He moved from one foot to the other. I won't be discussing the subject again, but thank you. I talked nonstop on the plane. He couldn't help his smile. Quiet filled the air, spun with kindness and understanding. He recognized the whiff of lavender, her scent. I like your stories. He kept his expression neutral. Do you want to hear a truth? This truth business again? Her lips twitched. Sure. You're a remarkable woman. His observation surprised himself. He truly was interested in her. In fact, he planned to learn everything about her. He surveyed the expansive living room, the cushioned window seat overlooking the side yard. A cherry wood coffee table and armchairs were cluttered with books. People called him a neatnik. Maybe so. He pressed down the inclination to straighten the stacks so all the book edges aligned. Gorgeous home. He peered up at the high ceilings, the gold-carved wooden mirror hanging over the marble fireplace. The room was painted a rich hue of chocolate brown. He assumed to his left was the music room, judging by the ebony black grand piano. No white or beige walls anywhere. You play piano? He asked. I tried. I struggled. I couldn't get the hang of reading the notes in the bass clef, so I quit. On the plane you mentioned you wanted to create something. The corners of her eyes crinkled. If you ask my piano teacher, she'll assure you it wasn't a Mozart sonata. He gestured toward the wooden beads, paint, Sharpies, newspaper, and glue on a separate table. Several beads were painted in various neutral shades and stood upright. Are these the dolls you're making? She shrugged. I've put the craft aside. He stepped into the room and picked up a miniature doll. Her black hair and blue eyes were intricately drawn. 2 yellow silk hair bows were glued on either side of her head above her ears. "She is precious." He fingered the hair bows. "I name all my dolls after spices. Hers is cinnamon." "Nice name." "Our business has a large amount of scrap wood I can use." "Right." He'd looked up her toy shop on the internet. "I brought the dolls to the homeless shelter Evan mentioned. My brother Lincoln donated several rocking horses, but I decided each child needed something simple." Simple, there was that word again. "Congrats on a worthwhile project," he said. "I'm learning simple is best." "Me too. Life is all about balance. So many material things are relatively useless. Like big, expensive cars." She grinned. "And designer purses." "You're an inspiration, Penelope." She picked up a tiny blue silk scarf and handed it to him. "I love this craft. Of course, you're familiar with my story." "Some parts. Remember, I'm an excellent listener, so keep talking." "When you're not sleeping," she reminded. "I prefer to keep my story to the parts you've probably memorized, so don't press me, okay?" "Apologies." He draped the tiny scarf over the doll's shoulders. "Sometimes I lose my finesse around beautiful women. Women who have survived hardships and heartbreak are even more—" She snatched the doll from him, readjusting the scarf before setting the doll back on the table. "You should have stopped when you were ahead with the word beautiful." "You're also fun and creative." "I'll brew your coffee, and you can tell me the reason you're here." She breezed down the hallway, and he followed. The wooden floor creaked as they stepped into the kitchen. "I dropped by to see Evan," Jacob said. "How's he feeling?" "So this is a house call?" "Truth? Well, he wasn't ready for the blatant truth because he hadn't come to terms with it yet himself." "You can call it a house call," he replied. "Evan is resting." Penelope surveyed the hallway as if Evan might appear at any moment. "Correction, he's playing video games. Do you want to go upstairs and check on him?" "You're his mom." Jacob moved beside her. "What do you suggest?" "Stay down here." She nudged him, a light-hearted nudge. "He'd probably prefer to run a 5K race than to see you. He's a bit prickly when he's interrogated." Though she joked, her face beamed whenever she mentioned her son. Her delight exposed a wide-open fracture in his own defenses and his attraction to her. Again, he questioned himself. What was he really doing here? "I blame his change in disposition on the rough road to adolescence," she finished. When she opened the bag, Jacob inhaled the scent of fresh ground coffee. "Is the antibiotic working?" he asked. "Antibiotics are a miracle drug." She scrutinized him, peeling away more and more layers of his resistance. "You realize, Jacob, that not many doctors make personal house calls anymore." "I'm new in town." Same old excuse, and he debated whether he should elaborate. "This is a way for me to get to know my patients better." "Do you make house calls often?" "Not very often." In fact, he never had. She spooned 4 scoops of coffee, then measured filtered water into the coffee pot. "Your interest means a lot. Most physicians won't take the time." "My patients are the reason I'm a doctor." "You look like a doctor." She switched on the coffee machine, then appraised him from head to toe. "I should have realized that on the plane. I imagined you—" He stepped closer to the counter. Why was he so fascinated with her? A difficult remembrance of his marriage and subsequent divorce resurfaced. "I'm having a baby," his wife Janet had declared. Tears had poured down her cheeks. He'd assumed they were tears of joy, and he joined in with tears of his own. Before he could bring out the champagne glasses, she'd added, "The baby isn't yours." And thus the marriage had ended. Her unfaithfulness had killed his pride and left him stunned. "Where did you go, doctor?" Penelope's steady voice drew him back from the devastating remembrance. "Down memory lane," he said. "Joyful times?" He tapped his chin. "No, I was thinking about my ex-wife." "You mentioned you were married." "A decade ago, and for a couple of years. She's an anchorwoman on a national network. You'd probably recognize her. In fact, she was awarded an honor for investigative journalism." "I'm impressed." "Don't be." He blinked. "Let's discuss something else. You were in the middle of imagining me." "I'd like to hear more about you." He'd severed all recollections of Janet from his mind, though when he caught a glimpse of her on a cable television show, a slight pinch of awareness went through him. Thankfully, nothing more. He'd made peace with the hurt she'd caused and resolved never to get his heart all twisted up again. He dated women casually, and the women knew not to demand any emotional entanglement from him. So, for the umpteenth bloody time, what on earth was he doing in Penelope's kitchen? "As a concerned physician, I'm here for Evan." "I'm a doctor," he said aloud. "At first, I imagined you as a professor who worked in academia." "Why?" "You cited statistics about airplanes." He stepped back as she reached around him to grab 2 mugs from a high glass cabinet. She handed them to him one by one. He set the mugs on the wooden kitchen table. "A single offhand remark and you pegged me as Professor Jacob. Now that I think of it, you don't fit the stereotype." "Which is?" "Shirt, tie, and tweed jacket." Another cliché. He folded cloth napkins she handed him and placed the napkins next to the mugs. "Are you interested in how I pictured you, Penelope?" "After we went our separate ways?" "While you were working at your job." "Probably sitting on the floor and playing with tiny toy trucks." "Gorgeous blue eyes, brown hair, and drop-dead gorgeous." He followed her back to the counter and grabbed 2 spoons. "I checked your website and saw your photo. You own New Beginnings Toys." "The photo is old." She pushed back her hair, the hint of silver strands. Her cheeks turned crimson. "How did you realize I was one of the owners of the toy shop?" "I asked Candy to verify for certain. The custom, handmade rocking horses are..." "Our specialty." "Right. And now you can sell your charming wooden dolls there." "Hardly a specialty, and I don't sell them. If I had my way, I'd give them to every child in the world." Her gaze shifted to the stairway. "Evan is returning to school in a couple of days. He's not thrilled about going back." "Why doesn't he like school?" "Peer pressure. 12 years old is a challenging age." She placed sugar and a creamer on the table and poured steaming coffee into 2 mugs. Once she sat, he claimed the chair across from her. "I met one of Evan's friends at the office today," he said. "He came in for a checkup." "Oh?" "A polite kid named Zach. He mentioned he was in 7th grade, and I asked him if he knew Evan." "Zach was once Evan's best friend." "Not anymore?" She cupped her hands around her mug. "Not anymore." "Zach inquired about volunteering at the clinic, and I encouraged him. He seems an ambitious chap. He's trying out for the high school swim team." Jacob spooned sugar into his coffee and stirred. "The coach accepts students in junior high." "If the student is good enough," a big if. "Is Evan trying out?" "He'd rather wash dinner dishes for a week." Penelope circled the rim of her mug with her forefinger. "A couple of years ago, he was the star of the team. Now he doesn't seem to belong anywhere, and I have no idea how to help him." Let Evan find his own way. The consideration came to Jacob's mind, and he quickly dismissed it. He had no right to tell Penelope how to raise her child. An hour passed quicker than anticipated, an easy hour filled with friendly conversation. She discussed the toy business and explained that everything had to be worth the cost of the retail value. Business was business. However, toys were unique and personal to each child. Discerning parents chose specialty toys for their children, believing in the value when cheap plastic toys were readily available at every big box store. The perfect toy was designed as an heirloom for the child and family, Penelope went on, though she and her brother were business people, and profit was a consideration. Excited parents gushed to their friends that they were being mindful of what they bought for their children, so everyone was satisfied. Success meant Penelope's employees continued to work, and the toy shops remained open. It also meant that Penelope and her brother could continue to enjoy a comfortable lifestyle. When Jacob stood, she walked him to the front door. As usual, I did all the talking. He smiled. I always liked making house calls. Evan never appeared, and Jacob didn't press the issue. After all, Penelope assured him that Evan was getting better. Thanks for the coffee, she said. You're welcome. I like your home. It's exactly the type of place I'm looking for. I met Candy in the pharmacy. If anyone can find your dream house, she's your realtor. Considering my hectic schedule, he said, I've only had a few hours to scope out roses in the surrounding area, and my house hunting is hindered. I've lived here most of my life. He knew that from their conversation on the plane. Where is the best place to find a home? He asked. Any suggestions? Well, At the doorway, he turned to her. May I call you? Why? I don't need another prescription. In your professional opinion, I needed tea with honey and lemon and lots of rest. He grinned with satisfaction and squeezed her hands. Did my prescription help? The tea is a blessing, though I couldn't manage the lots of rest part. Can you show me around the area this weekend? Candy is good, but you're better. She withdrew her hands and stepped backward. I'm not a realtor. Doesn't matter. Evan is sick. If he continues to take the antibiotic, he'll make a full recovery by Saturday, Jacob replied. Perhaps he can stay with your brother and sister-in-law for a bit. They live in Roses, right? She looked flustered. I'm not sure. I suppose I can ask them. After I leave the clinic tomorrow, I'll phone you to firm up our plans. Phone? Or I'll text you. He asked for her cell phone, texted himself, then handed the phone back to her. Afterwards, we can go for dinner. You mean to eat? You aren't on a diet, are you? I'm trying to choose healthy. Look, this probably isn't a suitable idea. Order a salad. She shook her head. It's not that. You're Evan's doctor. Are you dating anyone? I told you. Her gaze sharpened. I gave up dating. No pizzerias, I promise. Her cell phone pinged, and she read the text with a concerned frown. Sorry, Jacob. I need to contact the supervisor at our Rose's location. She tapped a number into her phone. A shipment is delayed because of stormy weather in New York, and the delay is causing repercussions to our stores along the East Coast. With the holidays approaching soon, no worries, I'll let myself out. As she put the phone to her ear and began instructing the supervisor, Jacob mouthed, I'll call you. He closed the front door behind him before she could protest. Penelope Reed was a remarkable woman. Despite her rather slapdash appearance on the plane and the untidy state of her house, she was quick, conscientious, and decisive at her job. Too bad it was a job she hated.